I'm an assistant director at NYSERDA, part of the Distributed Energy Resource Program teams, which includes our New York Sun program for distributed solar, as well as our distributed energy storage programs. And the topic of today's webinar is to give you an overview on the what we call the 6 gigawatt energy storage order that was published by the Public Service Commission this June, and then really do a deep dive into program design as it relates to disadvantaged community benefits for the distributed storage programs that was proposed in the implementation plan that NYSERDA filed this August for the residential and retail storage programs. So if you can move the next slide. So just in terms of the agenda for today, we have an hour today. We spend about 45 minutes or so going through presented materials and leave about hopefully as much time as possible for Q&A after that. So we'll start by going over some logistics and housekeeping items for today's webinar, then discuss the 6 gigawatt storage order, the catalysts for its origination, the key directives of the order, its directives as they pertain to disadvantaged communities. Then we'll have a brief discussion about exactly what kind of benefits energy storage can provide for disadvantaged communities. And then that will flow into a discussion of the design of the proposed programs for distributed storage as part of the implementation plan filing I mentioned, both for residential storage as well as for retail storage, retail being a moniker for distributed storage at commercial scale, which can be of different types. And then finally, we will close by discussing, lining up some questions for stakeholder input on the disadvantaged community or DAC side, as well as clarify the next steps in the process leading to program launch and further opportunities for engagement. And then, as I mentioned, we'll try to take as many questions as possible. Next slide, please. So just in terms of logistics, this webinar is being recorded. Roughly a week to 10 days after today, we will be uploading the slides as well as the recording online and posted to NYSERDA's Retail Energy Storage Incentives page in the webinar presentation section. You may queue up your questions at any time over the course of today's webinar using the WebEx interface. You don't need to wait for the presentation to be finished. And then, as I mentioned, after we're done with the presented materials, we will get to Q&A. And then we will be capturing any of the questions and comments that you provide today for review and deliberation. But we strongly encourage all stakeholders to submit formal comments to the Public Service Commission in the energy storage case docket in responding to the residential retail implementation plan. And I'll talk a little bit about how you can do that at the end of today's webinar. Next slide. So just before we get into the meat of today's webinar, I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes clarifying the different types of storage from a use case or market segment perspective, because this has a big bearing on disadvantaged community program design. So what you see here is 4 pictures corresponding to 4 different market segments or use cases. The one on the left is residential storage. So that's a Tesla Powerwall you see there. That's the residential scale unit. Typically 5 to 10 kilowatts, can be a little bigger. Then we have the 2 pictures in the middle correspond to retail storage, which again means distribution connected or distributed energy storage at commercial scale. And that can be of 2 types. You can have your on-site systems, which are supporting the site or the facility that they're built at, and they are serving load of that site primarily, also sometimes injecting to the grid. So that's your on-site retail. You then have off-site retail, which tends to be larger in size, 1 to 5 megawatts, is not associated with a specific site or a load offsetting customer, and is injecting its output, its electrons into the grid. And then you have bulk storage all the way to the right, which is generally 20 megawatts and higher. These are the transmission connected facilities that participate in the wholesale markets. They are also offsite projects because they're pumping all of their electrons into the grid. So we just have to keep this on-site and off-site distinction in mind when we get to the DAC program design. Next slide. Before we do that, let's just talk about the 6 gigawatt energy storage order, and starting with just background on why it was even published in the first place. So the Climate Act that was passed in 2019, the CLCPA, that has a mandate for a minimum of 3 gigawatts of energy storage to be deployed by 2030. Now, once the Climate Act was passed, there was a great amount of analysis done, referred to as the integration analysis, to support the scoping plan for the Climate Act that tried to construct a blueprint relating to how we would get to a fully decarbonized grid by 2040, which is one of the Climate Act's mandates. And the analysis done there in terms of the what kind of technology, mix of technologies we need to deploy and when to build the least cost zero carbon electric grid by 2040, what that showed is that in centralized scenarios, we'd need at least 12 gigawatts of energy storage by 2040 to support a 100% decarbonized grid, and then over 17 gigawatts by 2040 to support a fully decarbonized economy. So that suggests that there needs to be a lot more deployment leading up to these significantly elevated levels even before that. So recognizing these longer term needs and need to create a glide path to these higher levels of deployment in these out years, Governor Hochul back in 2022 expanded the 3 gigawatt target administratively to 6 gigawatts of 2030 and directed NYSERDA and the Department of Public Service to submit a roadmap, which is basically a petition that would propose new programs, funding for those programs, and policy recommendations to chart a path to this expanded target of 6 gigawatts of 2030. And that roadmap was filed back in December 2022 by NYSERDA and DPS that did propose new programs and estimated required funding to support those programs to get to that 6 gigawatt target. And those programs that were proposed ran the gamut from new programs for bulk storage, as well as retail, as well as residential sectors. And I'll get into the details of those in a second. Fast forward to June 2024 is when the PSC finally approved the 6 gigawatt roadmap through what we refer to as the 6 gigawatt storage order, or the 2024 storage order. And basically, as part of approving that roadmap, authorized NYSERDA to launch new programs to procure 4.7 gigawatts of additional storage capacity to get to that 6 gigawatt goal. But prior to doing so, NYSERDA would have to file separate implementation plans for bulk storage and then for distributed storage, i.e. residential retail storage programs. So one implementation plan for bulk, one for residential retail. And in both cases, the implementation plans would describe program design in more detail, and in both cases be subject to public comment and PSC approval. So, and the residential retail implementation plan was filed back in August and was just yesterday open for public comment. Next slide. So just to give you a high-level overview of the key directives not pertaining to disadvantaged communities that were in the 6 gigawatt storage order. On the bulk side, NYSERDA was authorized to procure 3 gigawatts of bulk storage. That will be through annual competitive solicitations, and that will be supported by an all-new mechanism known as the Index Storage Credit. That is the ISC. The ISC is essentially an analog to the index reg structure we have put in place for large-scale renewable procurement, land-based solar and wind. So it's a floating incentive. It floats based on what the wholesale market pricing is on a given day, and basically makes up the difference between what a project needs from in terms of its required revenues or its strike price, and what the project is getting from the wholesale market in terms of energy arbitrage and capacity pricing. These ISCs are paid over 15 years or more. So these are associated with long-term contracts where NYSERDA pays this credit over the life of the contract. And looking again at our longer-term needs for longer duration storage in excess of 4 hours, the order directed that a minimum of 20% of each of these bulk procurements must be longer duration resources. So that's the bulk side. Now, on the distributed side, NYSERDA was authorized to procure 1.5 gigawatts of retail storage and 200 megawatts of residential storage statewide. And that will be done through a continuation of the existing standard offer upfront dollar per kilowatt rebate or grant incentive programs, which we have been referring to on the storage side as the megawatt hour block. There was a total of $675 million in funding authorized for the retail program and $100 million for the residential program. All projects 1 megawatt in size and above are required through the order to pay prevailing wages, the programmatic requirement, thus aligning New York with the federal ITC investment tax credit requirements. And then finally, recognizing the concerns and risks of thermal runaway from lithium-ion batteries and some of the incidents we've experienced last year pertaining to fires associated with stationary storage facilities. NYSERDA is also directed to incorporate any relevant recommendations from the fire safety in the interagency fire safety working group into program rules. Next slide, please. Now, on the disadvantaged community program design front, the 6 gigawatt order had different directives for offsite versus on-site storage. So let's talk about offsite storage first. So again, when we talk about offsite storage, we specifically mean bulk projects and then any offsite retail projects. And the very first bullet you see on this slide basically makes the case that in the case of these offsite projects, their benefits, again, when you say benefits in terms of disadvantaged community benefits, it's really primarily reducing emissions from fossil fuel peaking plants. Those benefits are diffused across the electrical network or the NYSO capacity zone where the project is built. They do not, the benefits are not, you do not just get benefits simply as a function of the site where the project is built, right? And it's not that you need to necessarily be built right next to a peaker to displace emissions. What is important is that you're in the same local NYSO capacity zone as a peaker. So accordingly, the order directed that at least 35% of the offsite procurements, which amounts to just under 1.6 gigawatts, must be sited in the downstate region, which is NYSO zones G, H, I, J, K. And we should have provided a little more clarity on geographic specificity there. So zone G is Lower Hudson, H and I are Westchester, zone J is New York City, and K is Long Island. And this is in recognition of the fact that all of our peakers are sited downstate, primarily in New York City, but some are also in and around New York City. And then there's a high concentration of disadvantaged community census tracts also downstate. So that was the rationale here from the order. And more specifically, again, a dominant majority of those offsite procurements, the order directs, must be in New York City in zone J. So that's about 1,350 megawatts must be in zone J because of, again, the concentration of fossil fuel peakers in New York City. And then at least 5% of those offsite procurements amounting to at least 225 megawatts must be in those downstate zones that surround New York City. So again, zone G, Lower Hudson, H and I, Westchester, and K in Long Island. Next slide. On the on-site storage front, and again, on-site storage being a combination of residential storage and then any retail facilities that are built on-site, those provide direct benefits to the site at which they're installed, right? Whether it's a commercial customer or a residential customer. And the value, therefore, of these projects is primarily for the benefit of the site owners. So based on that, the 6 gigawatt order directed that at least 35% of the on-site procurements that NYSERDA does must be located within disadvantaged community census tracts themselves. And you'll see we proposed slightly more inclusive requirements or eligibility pathways for the DAC incentive for on-site storage projects in forthcoming slides. Next slide, please. So that's all of that content related to the 6 gigawatt storage order. Now, before I get into the proposed program design, when it comes to the implementation plan we filed for the distributed storage programs, let's just talk a little bit about what kinds of benefits can storage actually, even in theory, provide for disadvantaged communities. We know there's a lot of benefits storage can provide to the grid. I'm not going to get into all of those here, but specifically for disadvantaged communities, what kind of benefits can storage provide? And there are three really key categories of benefits. The first one is resiliency and backup power. That can be provided by residential storage, as well as on-site retail storage. The second category is driving bill credits or bill discounts, reductions in electric bills for customers. And that can be provided by primarily offsite storage, offsite retail storage in the same way as community solar can. So just think about community solar. Community solar generates bill credits. those bill credits or fraction of those are routed to subscribers' bills and provide bill discounts. So just like you have community solar, you can have community storage doing the same. And then finally, as I mentioned before, offsite projects, the primary benefit from DAC and an environmental justice perspective is being able to displace the emissions of those dirty fossil fuel peaker plants. And that can again be done by both the bulk facilities as well as those offsite retail facilities. So just keep this picture in your mind as we move to the next slide. Next slide, please. Yes. So keeping that picture in our mind, just want to give you a high-level overview of what the state's proposed strategy is to design programs to drive to get these different types of storage to actually drive those benefits, those categories of benefit. So first of all, resiliency or backup power. The key program design element here is and again, I'll get into the details in a second, is to have a significantly higher incentive rate versus the mass market rate to offset the cost of on-site storage, to make it more affordable to deploy in disadvantaged communities and for the benefit of those communities. On the residential side, you would have eligibility via census tracts, but then also via income and potentially other pathways, which we'll talk about. On the retail or non-residential side, the idea is to support what we call critical facilities or critical infrastructure facilities that are located in DAC tracts, as well as serving the communities that live in those census tracts. The second category, as I mentioned, is peaker reduction. And the key idea there is to have an explicit program focus or a carve out, a capacity carve out for projects that are sited in the same zones as peakers. And as I mentioned, this is primarily going to be New York City, but also the regions surrounding New York City. And then finally, bill discounts, which is not technically a part of the programs authorized by the storage order or the implementation plans, but it's still important to talk about. The vehicle delivered bill discounts from storage is the statewide Solar for All program. And this was a program that was authorized by the Public Service Commission through an order in May. And the idea here is you'll have a pool of participating community solar and storage projects that want to participate in this program. The bill credits they generate are all in a single utility, are all pooled together, and then they are delivered to utility energy assistance program customers in DAC tracts that are auto-enrolled into that program. And then so the bill credits just from that project pool go directly towards offsetting customer bills. This program was piloted in collaboration with NYSERDA by National Grid a couple of years ago, known as Expanded Solar for All. After it was successfully tested and piloted, the Commission approved the statewide program, as I mentioned, this May. And for that, the statewide program, we are planning that these credits from these participating projects would first start commencing by the end of next year. Next slide. So now let's do a little bit of a deep dive on the proposed program design for the residential and retail programs that were proposed in the implementation plan that we filed in August for the distributed programs. The very first thing to keep in mind is we are proposing to continue the previous, what we call megawatt hour block structure for the new programs for both residential and retail. What do we mean by megawatt hour block? The idea is basically, and it's emulated from New York Sun. So if you're familiar with New York Sun, this should be very familiar. It's a series of capacity-based, so megawatt and megawatt hour based funding blocks or segments. Each block is specific to a specific geography and a specific market segment. So for example, we would have a series of blocks that would serve New York City retail. We'd have a series of blocks that would serve rest of state residential, and so on. And the incentive rate is specified in dollars per kilowatt hour of installed capacity. Remember, storage capacity can be expressed in kilowatts or kilowatt hours or megawatts and megawatt hours. And then the incentive is paid out in its totality once the project is complete. The system can be, in terms of eligibility, the energy storage system can be standalone or paired with solar, or for that matter, even wind. But in either case, it must be connected to the grid. It can't just be totally islanded. We do want it to provide grid benefits when possible. Right? And then the third important thing to keep in mind is for both programs, what we propose in the implementation plan in terms of the structure of the blocks is only for the opening initial blocks themselves. So block sizes and rates are you'll see are only for a certain level, not the entirety of the program. And that's because there is significant amount of uncertainty in terms of what the market will be, what project economics will be, what the permitting landscape will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years out. So it's not appropriate for us to really design the rates and the sizes of blocks for specific territories at this moment in time. And as we've done before, typically once a block for a specific region and market segment is close to full allocation, we will plan and publish the rates for the next block. They will be listed online on our megawatt hour block dashboard, and then also announced through to subscribers of NYSERDA's energy storage mailing list before that the current block is allocated. And again, as usual, as always, when we make determinations for what the size and rate for next block should be, they're a function of project economics at the time, market trends at the time, as well as uptake rates for that block, the previous block. Next slide, please. Now let's hone in on the residential program, first talking about the mass market block design. And then we'll come to the program design specific to disadvantaged communities. So again, the 6 gigawatt order authorized NYSERDA to procure a total of 200 megawatts of residential storage statewide, utilizing funding of $100 million. And so in terms of opening block rates for market rate blocks, the implementation plan proposes an opening blocks for both the Con Edison region, which includes New York City and Westchester, as well as the rest of state, which excludes Con Edison and Long Island, both to be 10 megawatts each, or 25 megawatt hours, assuming 2.5 hours of duration. The Con Edison block opening block rate is proposed to be $250 a kilowatt hour. The rest of state block rate is proposed to be $200 a kilowatt hour, and that's in recognition of the higher cost of doing business downstate, particularly in New York City. On the Long Island front, it's just worth mentioning that we've had an ongoing incentive program for residential storage on Long Island that's been open actually since 2019. That has been funded and continues to be funded through Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, or RGGI funding, that is available for residential storage that is paired with solar PV. Again, it's still active. We still have a significant amount of funding that is remaining. To date, about 7 megawatts have been consumed. And then there's also an additional incentive on the DAC front of $150 a kilowatt hour that's available for projects where the solar system meets the requirements of the New York Sun Affordable Solar Residential Incentive for low to moderate income homeowners. So if you can stack those two and essentially get an incentive of $400 a kilowatt hour if you qualify. Additional funding for Long Island, and I would say the same thing on the retail side in a few moments, is subject to LIPA's participation in the statewide programs from a funding perspective. The 6 gigawatt order encouraged LIPA to voluntarily participate in the programs authorized. LIPA has not yet done so. So that is still a TBD at the moment, funding above and beyond RGGI for Long Island on the residential front. Next slide. So now let's talk about the residential program as far as disadvantaged community program design is concerned. So what we proposed here in the implementation plan is that we would allocate 40% of total residential program capacity. So we're going slightly above the 35% requirement as per the order. 40% of total program capacity. So remember, total program capacity is 200 megawatts. So 80 megawatts would be basically carved out and have its own tranche for a statewide incentive that would serve projects, residential projects that are serving disadvantaged communities and low-income homeowners. And this incentive we refer to as the Inclusive Storage Incentive, or ISI. So this is the residential ISI. So this would be a single statewide incentive. There won't be regional blocks as proposed. And in terms of eligibility criteria, we've proposed 4 to start. One is, so you have clarify, the project must meet all of the other requirements of the associated with the mass market incentive, but then must meet one of these, the other four, one of these additional four criteria to be eligible for the inclusive storage incentive, the higher incentive. There's a DAC census tract siting pathway. There is an income-based pathway. There is a residential 1 to 4 unit affordable housing pathway, and then there is a medical needs pathway. And what we propose is to allocate an initial capacity of 10 megawatts at an incentive rate of $450 per kilowatt hour to the first block of the residential ISI. So that is roughly twice the rate, twice the size or the rate of the market rate incentive that we proposed in the previous slide. And then again, the total commitment is 80 megawatts. As we're approaching the full allocation of that first tranche, we will be determining capacity allocation and incentive rates for future blocks, again, based on uptake trends, market conditions, battery pricing, as well as stakeholder feedback. Next slide. Now let's talk about the retail program. Again, let's start by, as described in the implementation plan filed in August. And again, starting with program design that pertains to mass market before talking about disadvantaged community-specific program design. So again, as a reminder, the retail program was, NYSERDA was authorized to procure a total of 1.5 gigawatts of retail storage statewide with funding of $675 million to do so. Again, just repeating that when we say retail, this pertains to both on-site as well as off-site systems that are up to 5 megawatt AC in size. What we propose in the implementation plan in terms of opening block rates for market rate incentives and market rate projects. For New York City, the opening block is proposed to be 300 megawatts, and that is in recognition of the high volume of projects that are mature and in the interconnection queue at $125 a kilowatt hour, which is the same rate as the previous New York City block, New York City Retail Block 5. We're also proposing a separate block for projects that are located in Con Edison's Westchester region. That's 100 megawatts in size for the opening block, also at $125 a kilowatt hour. And then for the rest of the state region, which we define as outside Con Edison, as well as Long Island, we are proposing an opening block allocation of 150 megawatts at $175 a kilowatt hour in recognition of the fact that project economics upstate or outside of New York City are more challenging than in New York City. As with residential storage, the availability of retail incentives for Long Island projects is still to be determined. It is subject to LIPA's voluntary participation in the retail storage program at the time of filing the plan, and as of now has still not been determined. So that is something that still needs to be determined. Next slide. Now coming to disadvantaged community benefit design for retail programs. And let's start with offsite. Again, we need to look at both offsite and onsite, right? So on the offsite, let's just first of all recall, as I mentioned, that the 6 gigawatt order requires that 35% of all offsite retail procurements must be sited in the downstate region, with a minimum of 30% of the total to be in New York City and 5% in zones G, H, I, and K is Long Island. So what we proposed in the implementation plan is to go meaningfully above that minimum requirement based on the high value of storage downstate to the grid, based on the concentration, the high concentration of peakers, as well as disadvantaged communities in the New York City region. So based on that, we propose that a minimum of 50% of retail program capacity, i.e. 750 megawatts, will be allocated in New York City. A minimum of 10%, i.e. 150 megawatts, would be allocated to Con Ed Westchester, which is NYSO zones H and I. In terms of implementation, because we have carved out these blocks separately, these can be implemented simply by sizing those blocks for New York City and Con Ed Westchester to meet those requirements. I will say right now, those are minimum targets as proposed. They may be adjusted upwards based on market conditions and if uptake levels can justify doing so. And then the last point to make here is if and when a retail program for LIPA is launched and implemented, though any procurements that are taken place in LIPA for the retail program would be additive to these minimums. So it wouldn't be that we would think, okay, we've satisfied our zones GHI, JK minimums from the order, and we don't need to procure any Long Island storage, they would be added to these minimums. But again, that will be subject to LIPA's participation in cost category for these programs. Next slide. Now coming to on-site retail program design. So again, the order requires that a minimum of 35% of on-site retail storage that NYSERDA procures must be sited in DAC census tracts. So accordingly, what we propose in the plan is to provide a all new incentive. Again, we're calling it the same inclusive storage incentive, but of the retail variety. So the retail ISI. This is again a significantly higher incentive rate for storage projects that are sited at eligible critical facilities that are located in DAC census tracts. Again, it's the same rate available statewide, except LIPA presently, as I noted. Now, in terms of eligible critical facilities, what are we thinking here? What do we mean more specifically? And in the implementation plan, you'll see we've proposed a list of eligible critical facilities, which include affordable housing properties, food banks, homeless and emergency shelters, community cooling centers, medical facilities, and independent living centers. Now, this is definitely one area we are looking to the stakeholders for input in terms of what should that complete list of eligible critical facilities be, and what kind of associated documentation and verification requirements, if any, should we have over and above just being in that list. Next slide. So in terms of that, the retail ISI, just in terms of incentive rates and capacity allocations. So based on historical uptake, we've seen that we expect that on-site retail procurements will at the most make up 10% of overall retail procurements. So if we end up doing 1,500 megawatts, as we are directed to do, that will be 150 megawatts of on-site retail, right? So we are proposing that 60 megawatts of that 150 megawatt upper bound, i.e., which is 40% of on-site retail, would be dedicated to the retail inclusive solar incentive. And any additional allocations will be subject to on-site retail procurement levels. So if we think we're going to end up procuring more than 150 megawatts of retail storage, we would increase that allocation. The opening block is proposed to be 15 megawatts in size at an incentive level of $350 a kilowatt hour. So that again is twice the rate of the upstate mass market retail incentive, and almost 3 times as the rate of the New York City mass market retail rate for the first block of the retail ISI. And again, because battery pricing is in flux, other project economics are in flux, interconnection costs are in flux, we don't believe it's appropriate to determine incentive rates for subsequent blocks at this point in time. They will be determined later based on where the market is, based on stakeholder feedback and uptake trends. And as I mentioned in the last slide, we do want stakeholder engagement and input to finalize that list of eligible facilities and additional eligibility criteria. Next slide. So with that discussion wrapped up, coming back to that graphic I had shown you a few slides ago, we now have a complete picture of the linkage between these benefit categories that storage can provide to disadvantaged communities, the market segments that can provide those benefits, and on the right side, the state programs and the design of these programs that would actually that are meant to get these different market segments or types of storage to actually drive those benefits. So when it comes to resiliency and backup power, again, it's on-site retail and residential storage that will be providing those benefits. And there, as I mentioned just now, we are proposing this inclusive storage incentive or ISI incentive on both the residential and retail fronts. In terms of driving bill credits or bill discounts, it's all about offsite retail. And that's where we have statewide solar for all being approved by the commission in May. And then finally, when it comes to storage being able to displace fossil fuel peakers and their emissions, it's going to be a combination of bulk and offsite retail. And there, the key program design concept is to have a procurement carve out for storage sited in the regions where peakers are, which is downstate and particularly New York City. Next slide. So just want to line up some questions that we are especially looking to get feedback on as it pertains to disadvantaged community programs. Of course, you are welcome to provide comment on any and all aspects of the programs described in the implementation plan. But specifically, we have 5 questions that we are earnestly looking for feedback on. Number one is, should the residential inclusive storage incentive rate uh, be a single rate for all eligible projects, or should it be different for projects that are serving low and moderate income households versus non-low and moderate income households? So, for example, you could be a household that is located in a DSE census tract, but you might not be an LMI household. Should you get a lower incentive, or vice versa? Number two, should there be additional eligibility pathways for the residential ISI beyond the ones that we specified, beyond income-based qualification and location at DSE census tract? We propose that one additional pathway, which is medical needs. There could be others. For example, have you experienced multiple electric shutdowns over the last period of time? Even if you're not LMI or in DSE tract, should you be eligible for this higher incentive rate if you experience shutdowns to your electric service? Number three, as I mentioned, what types of facilities should be eligible for the retail ISI? What is that list of critical facilities, the categories? Number four, beyond just being an eligible category, should we have additional requirements? Should additional documentation verification that to convince ourselves that the facility that the storage would be serving is indeed actually providing a significant level of benefits to the community? And then finally, leaving aside funding required to deploy the project, what kind of supplemental activities or activities needing technical assistance are required to prepare a site or facility for storage? So is there financial analysis? Is there community engagement? Is there business model analysis? Beyond just funding for deploying the project, are there other activities that need funding for? Next slide. So with all that out of the way, I just wanted to line up some next steps in the process, because of course, one of the key questions folks will have here is, when will these programs actually be launched? So we're still in the midst of the process there. As I mentioned, the residential retail implementation plan was filed in August. It was just noticed for public comment yesterday. That public comment period is ending November 18th. After that, the DPS and NYSERDA will be compiling all comments, reviewing them for the commission's consideration, and then following which the Public Service Commission would have to approve the plan or approve with modifications the plan before the programs could be launched. On the bulk side, the bulk implementation plan has not been filed yet. It must be filed by mid-October. It will also be similarly noticed for public comment for 60 days. And again, the PSC has to look at the comments, make a determination on which, if any, to accept, approve the plan, following which programs can actually be launched. And then finally, statewide solar for all is on its own track. That was approved, as I said, in May 2024. There are some process steps that need to happen before we can actually launch the program. Namely, utilities have to file their initial SSFA tariff statements by the end of this year. They have to file other transition plans. And then, as I mentioned, we expect and hope that credit distribution to customers will take place by the end of next year. Next slide. So I think the final slide I have here is, as I mentioned, we will be capturing feedback here, but to create a record for the Public Service Commission and the Department of Public Service staff to be able to capture, we highly encourage that you file your comments and recommendations in the as public comments, as formal public comments. So to do that, you need to go to the online docket link for the energy storage implementation plans. The link here is provided here. You can also use Google and search for case 18-E-0130. You can find it that way as well. And then you click on, there's a little box that you'll see which says post comments. Click on that, and then you can basically either attach your comments or enter them into a text box. We again encourage you to be as specific as you can. It's less helpful if you say this is a good program or this program won't work. We would encourage you just put as much sort of detail and nuance as you can to help us have an informed review of those comments towards modifying what was proposed here. Next slide. Okay, so I think that concludes the presented material. So we have about a little under 20 minutes for Q&A. If you could just give me a second to look at that list of questions, I'll be right back. Okay, so just going through the list, we've gotten only a handful of questions so far. So some of which are comments. The first most pertinent question that I can see here is, would there be an incentive adder for assets that have to comply with prevailing wage requirements? No, we have not proposed that either in the roadmap or the implementation plans, primarily because the feedback we've received suggests that labor costs associated with storage are not significant enough to warrant that, unlike what is the case for solar. The next relevant question I see is, for retail ISI projects, must they be located both in a DAC and at a critical facility? So as proposed, yes. For a project to be eligible for the retail inclusive storage incentive, the facility must be located in a DAC census tract, and it must be a designated critical facility. Next question is, how are the DAC benefits being measured or tracked? So I can't give you a detailed answer here. All I can tell you is that NYSERDA does track DAC benefits for all of our programs, as we are required to, due to climate law compliance requirements. Those are tracked by a separate team at NYSERDA, our energy and climate equity team working with their performance management team. There are public reports available on that have already been filed. If you're interested in more information, I just suggest you get in touch with any member of the NYSERDA team offline, and we can put you in touch with the right folks there, or even with the reports that have been published so far. Let me just see if any other member of the team that is online right now wants to add anything to what I said when it comes to tracking of DAC benefits.
You know, Shyam, this is Sarah Jayanthi, everybody from the New York Sun team. It will likely be similar to how we track the other solar energy equity framework programs. So, you know, criteria like percent of LMI households served, percent of facilities located in DACs. As Shyam said, we've done similar tracking across other programs at NYSERDA, and so we'll be consistent with that.
Thanks, Sarah. The next relevant question I see here is just a clarification question about whether off-site retail projects can receive the block incentive and VEDA rates. So the answer is yes. Both, again, whether your project is on-site or off-site, the incentives that have been proposed in this plan, both types of projects would be eligible for. And even if you're behind the meter and injecting, you do get paid using the VEDA tariff. There's an additive question there, which is statewide solar for all additive to the block incentives? So statewide solar for all isn't an incentive program as such. It's a procurement program. So I guess what I can say there is that projects participating in statewide solar for all on the storage front would still be eligible for retail storage incentives. What we propose in the implementation plan is that any project that does receive a retail storage incentive and participates in statewide solar for all would be associated with at least a 5% VEDA discount. So there is a minimum discount rate that pertains to a storage project that receives retail incentives participating in SSFA. I will also clarify, since we're getting a number of questions on SSFA, that NYSERDA will be publishing compensation schedules, which is basically the percentage of the percentage reader discount the projects would be required to give up, or based on various configurations, solar versus storage, what utility territory you're in, potentially what ITC rate the project is getting. So that those compensation schedules will be published, or must be published, by November 1st. Another question I see worth clarifying is, are Con Ed areas in Westchester getting a carve out, or are they getting thrown into upstate? So as I mentioned, as mentioned in the presented slides, we have on the retail side, we are proposing that Con Ed Westchester have its own block, and we propose an initial allocation of 100 megawatts at $125 a kilowatt hour for Con Ed Westchester. On the residential side, Con Ed Westchester is part of a combined New York City and Con Ed Westchester, just Con Edison block, that is proposed to receive a $250 per kilowatt hour incentive. One question, understandable question, which unfortunately we can't say much about, is when does NYSERDA anticipate a PSC ruling? That is not something we can really comment on or clarify or even speak to intelligently, frankly. You know, the PSC has a number of items on its agenda at any given point in time. When any given agenda item makes it to a given session is not something that we have any visibility into. Another question here is, can you elaborate on how SSFA will interact with community storage? How would that mechanism work? So, I mean, that is, you know, the answer to that question can be very lengthy, but yeah, just at a very high level, the Public Service Commission order that approved the statewide Solar for All program expressly or explicitly directed that storage is an eligible technology to participate in the SSFA program. So again, the idea is that you'd have a pool of projects that would have to explicitly opt in to the SSFA program, and then all the bill credits that they generate, the reader bill credits they generate, will all be combined into a common pool in that utility. These are utility specific programs, and then those bill credits, those pool credits, would flow into the bills, essentially, of participating utility energy affordability program customers that are located in DSC census tracts, and those, they will be automatically opted into that program. I should say that we are likely to do or hold a webinar specific to SSFA, both for the solar and storage components, in the fall. So I won't be able to answer. I'm sure I will not have answered the many questions that we will end up getting, and that folks have in their minds about SSFA, particularly SSFA and storage right now. I know that many folks on the storage side, stakeholders, have not heard about this program before. So we will be doing a dedicated webinar in the fall, this fall, on statewide solar for all. So at least I can give you that much of an assurance. Question about bulk storage. Bulk storage is described as 20 to 100 megawatts. Are projects 5 to 20 megawatts eligible? So that's something you're going to have to wait to see in the bulk implementation plan. That's not something that we can really comment on this time. Again, that plan has to be filed by mid-October. So if you have an interest in the bulk sector, I'd recommend that you track the progress of that filing and review it in full. Another question, will upstate storage projects that participate in SSFA count as providing benefits to DACs? I would think yes, absolutely. Again, all upstate utilities have their own roles of heap customers. And so it would not be any different for upstate storage projects as it would be for downstate. And here's a real sort of kind of a brass tacks question. When does NYSERDA expect the retail resi and bulk programs to be launched? So the bulk program, I can tell you there is a commission directed date, which is we have to launch the first bulk storage solicitation by, I believe, the end of June of next year. So that is binding as of now. On the distributed program front, again, as I mentioned, there is, we have to get through the comment period. Commission needs to review the comments and then, actually approve the implementation plan or approve with modifications at a future session. So we cannot really provide any specific clarity on when that happens, but we are hopeful that it would be sometime in the first half of next year. Again, that is really a speculative statement based on on what we see right now. So what I can say is any definitive details will be provided by NYSERDA through to members of the energy storage mailing list. So my firm recommendation would be, if you haven't already signed up to our energy storage mailing list, to do so as soon as possible. So I'm not seeing many other questions that we can answer at this time. But if any of the other NYSERDA team members that are online want to address any that you see as fit, now would be the time to do so. I guess I see one question, I think, yes, that we can answer here. So the question is, if the DAC census tract is no longer considered as a DAC tract after the project comes online, after the COD, how would it impact the incentive? That's something that we haven't considered in earnest for storage, but we have a precedent from the solar side that comes from our inclusive community solar adder, which is that we honor what the DAC is at the time of application. So this is not something that, again, we've specifically landed on here, but that is the precedent that we've had in the past for solar. Okay, so I think we've gotten through pretty much all the questions that we can answer at this time. There are a few questions that I think we really can't clarify, such as issues dealing with FDNY, for example. If any others come to mind, you're free to contact program staff directly to inquire. We will do our best to do so. You can email them to energystorage@nyserda.ny.gov, and someone will get back to you. Other than that, I'll just end by saying, again, these slides will be posted to the Retail Energy Storage Program website around a week after today. We will be collecting all the feedback and questions we got, but again, we strongly encourage you to submit comments in the docket. With that, I hope this was an informative presentation, and have a good rest of your day. Thank you.